Mixed race and unwanted. My parents made me, then rejected me. When I was 16, my parents kicked me out so my older sister could finally have her own bedroom. I remember asking them where I was supposed to go, and my mom just grinned and said, "Figure it out, darky." That was 7-6 ago. Now, today, they're both on their knees, begging me to forgive them. My dad's black and my mom's white. Thing is, I take after my dad, while my older sister Sarah looks a lot more white. That difference has shaped my whole life in ways you wouldn't believe. Even though my dad's black, he's got some deep-rooted colorism against black folks. And my mom? She's just flat-out racist. She always treated my dad like he was the exception. But that tolerance didn't extend to me. Sarah and I are just 2 years apart. But man, growing up felt like we lived in two totally different worlds. Every year, Sarah's birthday was this huge event. Not just a cake, but a whole week-long party. Meanwhile, my birthday was treated like any other random day. But even though Sarah got all the attention, she never treated me like trash the way our parents did. Whenever they weren't paying attention, she'd actually be kind to me. I'll never forget my 10th birthday. Sarah knew my parents wouldn't bother doing anything for me, so she came up with a plan. She asked if she could celebrate her birthday on my day, and of course, our parents were all for it. When the day came, she let me pick who I wanted to invite. And when it was time for the cake, she pulled Mom and Dad into another room so the rest of us could sing happy birthday, just for me. That was one of the happiest moments of my life. There was another time after we got our report cards. Sarah had mostly C's and I had a bunch of B's. She knew the drill. Our parents would lose it because I didn't get straight A's. While they were reading my grades, she begged them not to hit me, saying she didn't like violence. Thanks to her, I only got a few pinches instead of a beating. Even though my parents basically treated me like a cotton picker. Yeah, that's what they used to call me. I felt lucky, because at least I had Sarah in my corner. At least, until the day she turned her back on me. It was her 18th birthday. I woke up to the sound of boxes being packed. Not by just my parents, but my whole family. Everyone was there, stuffing all my stuff into boxes. The only thing your sister wants for her birthday is her own room. Sorry? My dad said when I asked what the hell was happening. I stood there, wide-eyed, asking where they expected me to go. There weren't any spare rooms left. Mom didn't even look at me. She just said, "You've got friends, you've got family. Figure it out, darky." Tears burned my eyes as I turned to look at Sarah. She wouldn't even meet my gaze. Her whole body was stiff, like she wanted to run. Took me almost half an hour to realize this wasn't some sick joke. I broke down, started sobbing, rocking back and forth, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. And they just ignored me, kept packing like I wasn't even there. After a while, survival mode kicked in. I swallowed my emotions and grabbed my phone. Called the only family member I still trusted, my aunt on my dad's side. After Sarah's betrayal, I wasn't sure if anyone would even want to help me. But without missing a beat, my aunt told me to come over and stay as long as I needed. I didn't eat breakfast, didn't give Sarah the birthday gift I had for her. I just grabbed the boxes, called an Uber, and left. Halfway there, my phone buzzed. It was Sarah. Seeing her name made my stomach churn with anger, but for some reason, I answered. "I'm so sorry. Please don't hate me," she said right away. I stayed silent, eyebrows scrunched tight. "Are you alone right now?" she asked. I told her I was. Sarah didn't say anything for a second, then flipped on FaceTime. That's when I saw it. A pregnancy test with 2 pink lines. It was hers. I gasped out loud. "Emily, I'm pregnant," she whispered. "I don't want to tell Mom and Dad yet. You know how they are. But I also didn't want you to be around when they found out." Instantly, I thought back to that time when she came home with a hickey, and somehow I got screamed at for being a bad influence. Yeah, I understood. "What can I do to help?" I asked her. She told me to ask Aunt Diane if she could help her out too. Before we could say anything else, I heard our parents coming up the stairs, singing "Happy Birthday" at the top of their lungs. I hung up in a hurry. My head was spinning. Part of me felt this little flicker of relief that maybe Sarah still cared about me, but mostly I was just scared. really scared for her. When I got to Aunt Diane's house, my stomach was tied up in knots. She opened the door, gave me a huge smile, and hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. "I'm so happy you came to visit," she said. I never told her what had happened. Clearly, my parents hadn't either. We sat there making small talk, trying to keep it casual. But I couldn't hold it in. Out of nowhere, I blurted out, "My parents are racist and my sister's pregnant." The second the words left my mouth, she burst out laughing, like she thought I was telling some kind of joke. And that's when I just broke down and started bawling like a little kid. By then, we had already hauled all the boxes inside, so we went in, and she sat there quietly, letting me get everything off my chest. I made her promise she wouldn't breathe a word to my parents, and she gave me her word. That next hour was basically me dumping it all out. The racism, the favoritism, getting kicked out. Every ugly thing. She hugged me tight, told me I was safe now, and let me cry until I finally passed out. At the time, I had no idea, but Aunt Diane was about to turn the tables on my parents. Mine and Sarah's lives were about to change in ways we couldn't even imagine. When I woke up the next morning on her couch, there was that brief second of confusion where I couldn't remember where I was. But it all hit me at once. The fight, getting kicked out, Sarah's pregnancy. Everything. My eyes felt all swollen from crying, and my back ached from sleeping in a weird position. I reached for my phone to check it. For missed calls from Sarah. Nothing from my parents. Not that I expected anything different, but man, it still hurt. I could hear Aunt Diane moving around in the kitchen, cooking breakfast. The smell of bacon and eggs filled the whole place, and my stomach growled so loud I was kinda embarrassed. I realized I hadn't eaten since lunchtime yesterday. "Good morning, sleepyhead." Aunt Diane smiled when I shuffled into the kitchen. She looked like she'd been up for hours already. "I made you some breakfast," she said, setting a plate down in front of me. "Eat up. We've got a lot to cover today." I sat down at her little kitchen table and started digging in. Whether the food was amazing or I was just that hungry, I'm not sure, but I tore through it like I'd never eaten before. Aunt Diane sat across from me, sipping her coffee, just letting me eat. After I'd gotten about halfway through my plate, she leaned forward a little and said, "I've been thinking about everything you told me, and I need to ask you something important. Has your dad ever hit you?" I nearly choked on my orange juice when she said that. Nobody had ever asked me that so directly before. "Not like punching or anything," I mumbled. "Just slaps, pinches, stuff like that." Aunt Diane's face darkened. "That's still abuse, Emily. And the emotional stuff too. The way they treat you compared to Sarah, that's abuse." I just stared down at my plate, feeling kind of frozen. When someone actually calls it what it is, it hits way harder. Deep down, I'd always known something was off about how they treated me, but hearing it labeled as abuse made me feel both seen and kind of ashamed. "I'm calling your parents after breakfast," she said firmly. "First, to let them know you're staying here for now. Second, to make it clear I know exactly how they've been treating you." My heart started pounding. "But what about Sarah?" I asked, panicking. "If you tell them everything, they'll know I spilled about the pregnancy." "I'm not mentioning the pregnancy," Aunt Diane reassured me. "That's Sarah's story to tell when she's ready. But the rest, they need to hear it." After we finished breakfast, while Aunt Diane cleaned up the kitchen, I called Sarah back. She picked up right away, her voice frantic. "Are you okay? Where are you? Did Aunt Diane let you stay?" She shot question after question at me without even breathing. I told her I was fine and that Aunt Diane was letting me stay. She sounded relieved, but there was still a lot of worry in her voice. I asked how she was holding up and whether our parents had caught on yet. "They don't suspect a thing," Sarah said. "They're too busy redecorating my room now that it's just mine." There was this heavy guilt in her voice when she said it. "Emily, I'm so sorry. I should have found another way." I wasn't totally past the hurt yet, but I understood why she did it. "It's okay," I told her. "But Sarah, you need a plan. You can't hide being pregnant forever." Sarah started crying softly on the other end of the line. "I know. I'm scared to tell them. You know exactly how they'll react." Yeah, I knew all right. They'd find some way to pin it on me, even though I had nothing to do with it. They'd shame Sarah. Sure. But in the end, they'd probably forgive her like nothing ever happened. They would just make everything worse. What about the dad? I asked her gently. Is he still around? It's Jason, she said, almost whispering. You know, the guy from my chemistry class? I remembered him vaguely, tall, kinda quiet, played baseball. His parents are super religious, she added. If they find out, he's screwed. We both are. Jason Miller. Yeah, I knew exactly who she meant. Sarah dating someone like Jason wasn't exactly something I ever would have guessed. Have you thought about what you want to do? I asked her gently. Like, do you want to keep it or? I don't know yet, Sarah admitted, her voice small. I just need some time to figure everything out. Could you maybe ask Aunt Diane if she'd be willing to help me? Maybe I could come over and we could talk. I promised her I would ask, told her to sit tight, and we hung up. Right after that, I caught Aunt Diane's voice drifting from the living room. She wasn't just talking. She was laying into somebody. Even though I couldn't catch every word, it wasn't hard to guess she was tearing into my parents. I sat on the edge of the bed in the spare room, surrounded by my unpacked boxes. Part of me wanted to creep closer and listen in, but another part of me was scared stiff about what I might hear. After what felt like forever, things finally went quiet. A minute later, Aunt Diane showed up in the doorway. Well, she said, sarcasm practically dripping from her voice. Just had a real pleasant chat with your father. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Apparently, according to him, they didn't kick me out. They just suggested I might want to stay with friends for a bit. I actually laughed. Yeah, sure. That's why they packed up all my crap like I was moving across the country. I know, Aunt Diane said, coming over and sitting next to me on the bed. Your dad's always been good at rewriting history to make himself look better. But don't worry, I made it clear you're staying here for now. And we're gonna have a family meeting soon to talk about how they've been treating you. My stomach dropped. A family meeting? With them? Seriously? Do we have to? Eventually, yeah, she said, squeezing my shoulder. But not right away. First, I want you to get settled here. Feel safe. And something tells me there's something else you want to ask me? I nodded, suddenly feeling like a little kid again. Sarah wants to know if she can come over. Talk to you about, her situation. Aunt Diane gave me this soft smile. Of course she can. Tell her to come by tomorrow after school. I'll make sure to leave work early. The rest of the day felt kinda weird, but good too. Aunt Diane helped me unpack my boxes and set up my stuff in the spare room. It was small, but it felt a million times better than sharing a room with Sarah. I had my own desk, a queen-sized bed, and, for the first time in my life, actual privacy. Later, Aunt Diane even took me out shopping for decorations so I could really make the room feel like mine. While we were running around, I kept glancing at my phone. Still no messages from my parents. Not a single, "Are you okay?" or "We miss you." Just dead silence. Sarah texted, though, saying she'd come over around 4 p.m. the next day to talk to Aunt Diane. That night, Aunt Diane ordered a couple pizzas and we crashed on the couch watching movies. Felt so normal, like what I always imagined real families did. No walking on eggshells. No feeling like my very existence was some kind of problem. Just relaxing. Just being. At one point, during a lull in the movie, Aunt Diane looked over at me and said, "You know, I always wanted kids of my own. It just never happened for me. But having you here, it's nice." I didn't know what to say. I just smiled and went back to watching the movie. But deep down, something warm settled in my chest. For the first time in what felt like forever, I fell asleep feeling safe. The next morning, a Wednesday, Aunt Diane had to work. She left me a key and told me to make myself at home. I spent the day poking around her apartment, getting familiar with everything. Then, in the afternoon, I worked on some homework I dragged along. By 3 o'clock, the nerves were kicking in hard, thinking about Sarah coming over. Right at 5 o'clock sharp, Sarah showed up at the door. She looked pale, tired, but she gave me this relieved smile when she saw me. We hugged for what felt like forever before I pulled her inside. "This place is really nice," she said, looking around. "Aunt Diane's not back yet?" "Any minute now," I told her. "You want some water or something?" She nodded and we went into the kitchen. Sarah looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept at all and way too thin. We sat at the little kitchen table in this weird, heavy silence for a few minutes. Finally, she broke it. "Mom and Dad think I'm at debate team practice," she said, her voice shaky. "They don't suspect anything yet. But Mom made a comment this morning about me gaining weight. I almost had a panic attack." Before I could even respond, we heard keys in the door. Aunt Diane came in, still wearing her work clothes and carrying a bag of groceries. When she saw Sarah, her whole face lit up. "There's my other favorite niece," she said warmly, dropping the groceries on the counter so she could pull Sarah into a hug. Sarah didn't even try to hold it together, she just started crying right there in Aunt Diane's arms. The next hour was intense. Sarah ended up telling Aunt Diane everything about Jason, about being 7 weeks pregnant, and how terrified she was that our parents would find out. Aunt Diane listened closely the whole time, asking questions here and there, but never once judging her. "Have you made any decisions about what you want to do?" Aunt Diane asked her gently. Sarah shook her head, looking lost. "I don't know," she whispered. "I'm only 17. I'm supposed to start college next year. But the thought of going through with an abortion, I don't know if I could handle it." She broke down crying again. "Maybe adoption? I'm not sure." "You've got options," Aunt Diane said calmly. "And plenty of time to figure it out. But the first step is seeing a doctor. Make sure everything's okay." Could you come with me?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared to go by myself." "I can't exactly ask, Mom." "Of course, sweetie," Aunt Diane said immediately. "And Sarah, whatever you decide, I'm behind you even if your parents aren't." Sarah looked over at me then, her eyes still swimming with tears. "I'm so sorry for what happened, Emily," she said. "I just panicked. I thought if they found out while you were still living there." "It's okay," I told her, and this time I truly meant it. "I get it. Honestly, it's better for me here anyway." After Sarah left, promising she'd text us to set up a doctor's appointment, I helped Aunt Diane get dinner started. My mind was racing, trying to keep up with everything that was happening: Sarah's pregnancy, my new life here, and the looming confrontation with my parents that Aunt Diane kept mentioning. As we chopped vegetables together, I finally blurted out, "Aunt Diane, what's gonna happen when they find out about Sarah?" She let out a long sigh. "I don't know for sure, honey," she said. "But whatever happens, we're facing it together. All three of us." The next week turned out to be surprisingly peaceful. I settled into a routine at Aunt Diane's place. She'd wake me up every morning for school, drop me off on her way to work, and pick me up afterward. At night, we'd make dinner, watch TV, and just talk. Real talks about my interests, my friends, my classes, all the normal stuff parents are supposed to care about, but mine never really did. Sarah came over a few afternoons after school, pretending it was for debate team research. Aunt Diane took her to the doctor, and they confirmed she was about 9 weeks along. Sarah still hadn't decided what she wanted to do yet, but at least now she was getting proper prenatal care in the meantime. My parents? Still nothing. Not a call, not a text, not even a hint they cared where I was. Sarah said they barely even mentioned me around the house, like I just disappeared. It hurt, but in a way it was kind of a relief too. It confirmed what I'd always known deep down. They didn't love me the way parents are supposed to love their kids. Then Saturday evening it all hit the fan. Sarah called me, her voice shaking so badly I could barely understand her. "Mom found my prenatal vitamins," she sobbed. "She put it together, me gaining weight, she knows Emily. She knows I'm pregnant." My heart dropped into my stomach. "What happened? What did she say?" "She went nuts," Sarah cried. "She started screaming about how I ruined my life. Said no decent college would ever want me now. That I brought shame to the whole family." She paused, choking back sobs. "And then Dad came home in the middle of it and he lost it too." I immediately put her on speaker so Aunt Diane could hear everything. "Are you safe right now?" Aunt Diane asked urgently. "I'm locked in my room," Sarah said. "But they keep pounding on the door, yelling for me to come out and face the consequences of my actions. I'm scared." Aunt Diane didn't even hesitate. She snatched up her car keys. "We're coming to get you," she said. "Pack a bag with the essentials. You're staying with us." The drive over to my parents' house was tense as hell. Aunt Diane had a death grip on the steering wheel, her knuckles bone white, and she didn't say a word the whole way. I sat beside her, firing off texts to Sarah letting her know where we were, but she'd stopped responding, and that made me panic even more. When we finally pulled up outside, my stomach twisted itself into knots. I hadn't been back here since the day they kicked me out. The porch light was on, and both of their cars were parked in the driveway. "Stay in the car," Aunt Diane said as she threw it into park. "No way," I said immediately. "Sarah's my sister. I'm going with you." Aunt Diane looked like she wanted to argue, but then she just nodded. We got out together and marched up to the front door. The second Aunt Diane rang the doorbell, the shouting inside stopped dead. A few seconds later, Dad yanked the door open. His face went through about 4 different emotions in 5 seconds: rage, then surprise, then this fake, stiff smile the second he saw Aunt Diane standing there. "Diane, what a surprise," my dad said, completely pretending I wasn't even standing right next to her. "What brings you by so late?" "Cut the crap, David," Aunt Diane shot back, her voice sharp and cold. "We're here for Sarah. She called us." Just then, my mom showed up behind him, her face all blotchy from either crying or screaming, probably both. "This is a family matter," Diane, Mom said, her voice shaking. "You have no business being involved." "I am family," Aunt Diane fired back. "And so is Emily, even though you both seem to have forgotten that." "Now, where's Sarah?" "In her room," Dad said, waving his hand like it was no big deal. "Throwing a teenage tantrum. She can come out when she's ready to discuss her options rationally." The way he said options made my stomach twist. I knew exactly which option he thought was reasonable. "I'm going to get her," I said, already moving toward the stairs. Mom stepped forward like she was going to block me. "You don't live here anymore, Emily. You can't just move," Aunt Diane cut in, her voice so firm and commanding that Mom actually flinched and stepped aside. I bolted upstairs to Sarah's room, my old room too, and knocked softly. "Sarah, it's me. Open up." The door cracked open just a little and Sarah peeked out. Her face was soaked with tears. The second she saw me, she threw the door wide and wrapped her arms around me. "Thank God you're here," she whispered against my shoulder. "They've completely lost it. Dad's saying if I don't get an abortion, he's kicking me out. And Mom keeps bawling about what everyone at church will think." "Pack your stuff," I told her without hesitation. "You're coming with me and Aunt Diane." Sarah nodded quickly and started tossing clothes and toiletries into a duffel bag. I helped her grab the things she missed: her laptop charger, her favorite sweater, even the old stuffed bear she once gave me that somehow survived when they purged all my stuff. When we came back downstairs with her bag, Aunt Diane was still locked in a fierce argument with our parents in the entryway. "You can't just take her." Mom was crying. "She's 17, she's still a minor." "Watch me," Aunt Diane said, her voice calm but steely. "Unless you want me to call Child Protective Services and tell them exactly how you've treated both of these girls, I suggest you back off." Dad's face turned a deep, ugly shade of red. "Is that a threat?" he growled. "You've got no proof." "I have Emily's testimony," Aunt Diane said coolly. "And now I've got evidence of you trying to force Sarah into a medical procedure against her will." "You really want to see how that plays out, David?" My parents exchanged a look. For the first time in my life, I saw something that actually looked like fear in their eyes. "Sarah can make her own choices once she's 18, Mom said, shifting tactics fast. "But for now, she stays here where we can take care of her." "Take care of her?" I snapped. "You mean the way you took care of me? By treating her like trash if she doesn't do exactly what you say?" Dad finally turned his glare on me. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said harshly. "We've always provided for you. Both of you. Food and a roof over our heads is the bare minimum," I shot back. "You never loved me. And now that Sarah's made a mistake you don't approve of, you're gonna punish her too." Sarah stepped forward, clutching her bag tight to her chest. "I'm going with Aunt Diane and Emily," she said, her voice shaking but strong. "I'll come back when you're ready to support me, no matter what decision I make about my baby." Mom started crying again, but this time it felt fake, like she thought the tears could guilt-trip us into staying. "Sarah, please," she begged. "Think about your future." "I am thinking about my future," Sarah said firmly. "And right now, my future isn't here." We walked out together. Neither of them tried to stop us. As Aunt Diane drove us away, I looked back through the window. My parents stood in the doorway watching us go. They looked small, pathetic. Nothing like the terrifying authority figures they'd always seemed like growing up. The next few days were a big adjustment. Sarah took my bed while I moved to the pull-out couch in the living room. Aunt Diane's tiny apartment felt crowded with all 3 of us crammed in there, but somehow it still felt warmer, safer, more like a real home than our parents' house ever had. My parents blew up Sarah's phone for the first couple of days. Sometimes they screamed threats, sometimes they sobbed and begged her to come home. Eventually, Sarah just turned her phone off to get some peace. Me? They didn't call me once. Not even to pretend they cared. On the 3rd day, I was home alone. Aunt Diane was at work and Sarah was off at a follow-up doctor's appointment. When the doorbell rang, I casually peeked through the peephole, and my heart nearly exploded out of my chest. It was them, both of my parents standing there on the front step. I picked up the phone and called Aunt Diane right away. "They're here," I whispered, glancing nervously at the front door. "Mom and Dad are outside." "Don't let them in," she said, her voice firm and serious. "I'm leaving work now. I'll be there in 10 minutes. The doorbell rang again, followed by loud banging a few minutes later. "Emily, we know you're in there," my dad yelled. "Open this door right now." I stayed completely still, barely breathing, praying they'd give up and go away. But they didn't. Instead, after a few tense minutes, I heard a key being shoved into the lock. The door swung open, and there they were, my parents standing in the doorway. Dad was holding a key in his hand. "Aunt Diane gave us a spare key back when she went on vacation," he said, his voice a lot calmer now. "Just in case we needed to water her plants or bring in her mail," he added. I instinctively backed away from them. "This isn't an emergency," I said coldly. "You need to leave." Mom stepped inside anyway, her eyes scanning the apartment. "Where's Sarah?" she demanded. "We need to talk to her." "She's not here," I answered honestly. "And I already called Aunt Diane. She's on her way back." Dad let out a heavy, frustrated sigh. "Emily, this has gone on long enough. You made your point, but Sarah needs to come home now," he said. "She's still underage, and what Diane's doing could technically be considered kidnapping," he added. "She didn't kidnap anyone." I snapped. "Sarah left because you tried to force her into getting an abortion." "We weren't forcing her," Mom insisted, though she wouldn't meet my eyes. "We were just trying to help her see what the right choice was." "The right choice according to who?" "You." I shot back, my anger boiling over. "It's her body. Her baby. Her decision." Dad took a step closer to me and I immediately backed up. Something flickered across his face, maybe it was hurt, when he realized I was scared of him. Good. He deserved to feel that. "This isn't about you, Emily," he said sharply. "You always make everything about yourself." I stared at him, stunned. "Are you kidding me right now?" I said, my voice shaking with rage. "You threw me out of the house on Sarah's birthday. You've spent my whole life treating me like I don't matter, and now you have the nerve to accuse me of making everything about me." Before they could even get a word out, the apartment door flew open again. Aunt Diane stormed in, her face thunderous. Sarah was right behind her, looking pale and shocked at the sight of our parents. "Get out of my apartment," Aunt Diane said in a voice so calm it was terrifying. Dad squared his shoulders. "Not without Sarah," he said, turning toward her. "Come on, kiddo. This has gone on long enough. Come home where you belong." Sarah walked over and stood beside me and Aunt Diane. "I'm not going anywhere," she said steadily. "Not until you accept that it's my choice to make." Mom burst into tears again. "Sarah, please. We just want what's best for you," she sobbed. "No, you want what's easiest for you," Sarah shot back. "Whatever's best for your precious reputation. You don't actually care what I want or need." Dad tried to argue. "That's not true. We love you," he protested weakly. "Like you love Emily?" Sarah said sharply. That shut them both up. They looked helplessly at me, then at each other, completely lost for words. Aunt Diane stepped in before things could spiral further. "I think it's finally time for that family meeting I mentioned," she said firmly. She motioned to the couch. "Sit down. Both of you." Shockingly, my parents actually obeyed. Maybe they were too stunned by Diane's authority, or maybe it finally hit them how serious this had gotten. Either way, we all sat down and, for the next 2 hours, we actually talked. Sarah told them about the fear that gripped her when she found out she was pregnant, and how she knew immediately that they would handle it badly. I finally let out years' worth of bottled-up feelings. About birthdays ignored, report cards shrugged off, and the constant sense of never being good enough. Aunt Diane shared her own view, admitting she had spent years watching their behavior but stayed silent, something she now deeply regretted. For most of it, my parents just listened, only occasionally trying to defend themselves before being quickly shut down. By the end, Mom wasn't fake crying anymore. She was genuinely sobbing, and Dad looked like he'd aged a decade right there in front of us. "I didn't realize," he said hoarsely, his voice cracking. "I didn't see what we were doing." "That's crap," Aunt Diane said bluntly. "You saw it. You just didn't care. The real question is, do you care now?" Mom looked at me through her tears, her face crumpling. "Emily, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "We've been terrible parents to you." And for the first time in my life, it actually sounded real. I didn't know what to do with her apology. Part of me wanted to grab onto it, to finally have the loving parents I'd wished for my whole life. But another part of me, it wanted to tell them to shove it. Sorry doesn't erase 17 years, I said after a long pause. But it's a start. After that, the conversation shifted to Sarah and her pregnancy. You could tell our parents were still uncomfortable about it. They weren't exactly jumping for joy, but at least they stopped trying to push her into an abortion. Instead, they actually listened while Sarah talked through her options, keeping the baby, adoption, or ending the pregnancy, and the fears that came with each choice. By the time they finally left, nothing was settled. But something in the air had definitely changed. They promised they'd respect whatever decision Sarah made about her pregnancy. They even invited us to come back home, but said they'd understand if we wanted to stay with Aunt Diane for now. Once the door clicked shut behind them, the three of us basically collapsed onto the couch, completely drained. Do you think they really meant it? Sarah asked softly, picking at a thread on her jeans. About supporting my choice? I don't know, Aunt Diane said honestly. People don't just flip a switch and change overnight. But maybe they're starting to realize just how much damage they've done. I wasn't convinced, though. One intense conversation couldn't magically undo a lifetime of hurt. Still, for the first time, it felt like maybe, just maybe, things could be different. That night, lying on the pull-out couch and staring at the ceiling, I replayed everything in my head. In less than 3 weeks, my entire life had been flipped upside down. I'd lost my home, found an unexpected ally in Aunt Diane, and somehow wound up in this weird new in-between place with my parents. Sarah crawled out of her makeshift bed, rubbing her eyes. Can't sleep? I asked. She shook her head, tapping her temple. Too much noise up here. Then she looked at me, serious. Emily, do you think I should give them another chance? I sat up, thinking it over. That's really up to you, I said. They're still our parents, for better or worse. I'm scared they'll just go back to how they used to be, she admitted quietly. That they'll pressure me about the baby, or start treating you like crap again. They probably will, I said, not sugarcoating it. People don't change overnight. But now we have Aunt Diane. And we have each other. Sarah smiled a little at that. We've always had each other, she said softly. She hesitated, then added, I think I want to keep the baby. Is that crazy? I reached over and squeezed her hand. Not crazy, I told her. Scary? Absolutely. But you're going to be an amazing mom. At least better than ours, Sarah said with a dry laugh. Sitting there in the dark with her, it hit me. No matter what happened with our parents from here on out, whether they really changed or just faked it, Sarah and I would be okay. We'd made it this far. We'd keep pushing forward. Together. The road ahead was going to be messy. Sarah's pregnancy, my iffy living situation, our wrecked relationship with mom and dad. None of it would be simple. But for the first time, I didn't feel like we were facing it alone. The next morning, I woke up with this weird mix of hope and doubt twisting in my chest. Sarah was curled up next to me on the pullout, asleep with one hand resting gently over her flat stomach. I carefully slid out of bed without waking her and found Aunt Diane in the kitchen flipping pancakes. Morning, she said, setting a hot stack on a plate for me. How do you sleep? Okay, I guess, I said, drowning the pancakes in syrup. Sarah told me she wants to keep the baby. Aunt Diane just nodded like she'd expected it. I figured she might, she said. That girl's had a nurturing spirit since she was little. She sat across from me and smiled. How do you feel about becoming an aunt? She asked. I hadn't really thought about it that way before. Weird, I admitted. But good weird. We ate quietly for a while until Sarah stumbled into the kitchen, hair sticking out in every direction like a cartoon character. Aunt Diane just handed her a plate without saying a word, and Sarah accepted it with a tired smile. After we finished eating, I finally asked, so, what now? Now we make a plan, Aunt Diane said, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Sarah needs to finish school. You both need some stability. And your parents? They need to prove they're actually serious about changing. Sarah stared down at her empty plate. I should probably talk to Jason too, she mumbled. He deserves to know what I'm deciding. That talk happened later that afternoon. Jason showed up looking like he was about to face a firing squad, probably half expecting Aunt Diane to tear him a new one. Instead, she handed him a glass of lemonade and gave them privacy to talk in the bedroom while I hung out in the hallway pretending not to listen. I couldn't hear everything, but what I did catch surprised me. No arguing. No trying to deny anything. Jason just kept saying stuff like, whatever you need and I'll be there. When they finally came out about an hour later, Sarah looked like a huge weight had been lifted off her shoulders and Jason, well, he looked determined even though you could still see the fear all over his face. I'll tell my parents tonight, he promised before heading out. They'll probably freak, but they're real big on responsibility. No way they'll let me back out of this. After he left, Sarah just flopped down next to me on the couch with a heavy sigh. Well, that actually went better than I thought it would, she said. Yeah, I admitted, leaning back. He seems like a good guy. He is, Sarah agreed. Terrified out of his mind, but definitely decent. The next few days were a total blur of planning and trying to figure everything out. Aunt Diane ended up calling our parents to set up another meeting. This time, it wasn't just the adults. Jason and his parents were coming too. Man, that was awkward. Jason's parents looked completely blindsided at first, but they pulled it together pretty quick, especially his mom. She was already asking questions and trying to come up with plans while his dad still looked like he was processing. My parents, on the other hand, were all stiff and formal, but hey, at least they weren't yelling. The adults got into all the practical stuff, things like medical insurance, where everyone was gonna live, and what school plans would look like. I didn't have much to say, so I mostly sat there quietly, just watching everyone's faces. I caught my dad sneaking looks at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. There was this weird mix of guilt and something else I couldn't really put my finger on. My mom barely made eye contact with anybody the whole time. After that meeting, our parents asked if we'd think about coming home for dinner that weekend. A fresh start, my mom called it. Sarah immediately looked over at me like, your call. I'll go wherever Emily goes, she said, not budging an inch. My dad just nodded slowly. Fair enough. I agreed, but only on one condition. Aunt Diane had to come too. No way was I walking back into that house without backup. They didn't love it, but they said yes. That Friday night ended up being one of the most painfully uncomfortable dinners I've ever sat through. It was obvious my mom had spent hours in the kitchen making all our favorite foods, even getting mine right for once, which was honestly a first. Still, the conversation was so forced it hurt. Everyone was trying way too hard to be polite. Halfway through dinner, my dad cleared his throat like he was about to choke on something. I've been doing some reading, he said, all awkward, about colorism and how it impacts kids. He looked straight at me when he said it. I never realized what I was doing to you, Emily, he said. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'd like a chance to do better. I legit almost choked on my mashed potatoes right then and there. My dad? Reading about colorism? Admitting he was wrong? I had no clue what to say, so I just gave him a small nod. Then my mom jumped in. We've also found a family therapist, she said. For all of us, if you girls are willing. We've got a lot to work through. I glanced over at Sarah, who raised her eyebrows like, what do you think? Maybe, I said carefully. We'll think about it. After dinner, my dad showed me my old room, or, well, what used to be my old room. They'd totally redone it. New paint, new furniture, even a fancy desk set up for studying. It was way nicer than anything I'd ever had growing up. We thought, if you wanted to come back, he started, but then his voice kind of trailed off. I don't know yet, I said honestly. This is all a lot. He nodded like he got it. The room's yours whenever you want it. No pressure. That night, back at Aunt Diane's, Sarah and I stayed up way too late, just talking everything out. She was torn about the idea of moving back home. On one hand, our parents were actually being weirdly supportive about the baby now. But on the other hand, we both knew how fast they could turn on a dime. What do you think? Sarah asked me. Should we give them another shot? I sighed. I really don't know. Part of me wants to believe they've changed. But there's another part of me that's just waiting for the other shoe to drop. Same, Sarah said, nodding. But also, I feel bad. I mean, Aunt Diane's place is tiny, and it's already cramped with the three of us. It's gonna be even crazier once the baby's here. She wasn't wrong. Aunt Diane had been incredible, but it wasn't exactly a forever kind of setup. We decided we'd talk to Aunt Diane about it in the morning. When we brought it up over breakfast, she surprised the hell out of us. I've actually been thinking about it too, she said, setting her coffee down. I've been looking at 3-bedroom apartments. Something with more space for all of us. You want us to stay with you? Sarah asked, sounding like she couldn't believe it. Aunt Diane just shrugged like it was no big deal. If that's what you want, she said. Or you could try going home if you feel ready for that. Just know my door's always open if it doesn't work out. We ended up talking about it for hours. By the time everything was said and done, Sarah and I had a plan. We'd move back home on a trial run. Part of the deal was that we'd start family therapy, spend our weekends over at Aunt Diane's, and the second we saw even the slightest hint of our parents slipping back into their old patterns, we'd be gone. Moving back in was strange. My parents were trying so hard that it actually made things kinda awkward. Dad kept hovering, asking about my schoolwork like he was desperate to help with something. Meanwhile, Mom suddenly got super interested in my life, wanting to know all about my friends, my hobbies, all the little stuff she'd ignored before. They were both all over Sarah too, making sure she was eating right and getting plenty of sleep. And honestly, family therapy was even stranger. Dr. Chun, our therapist, didn't let a single thing slide. Whenever Dad tried to downplay the stuff he used to do, she'd call him out right on the spot. And when Mom broke down in tears about how hard she had it, Dr. Chin calmly pointed out that, actually, it had been way harder on me. The real breakthrough didn't happen until about a 2-month in. We were talking about birthdays, specifically how they always made a big deal over Sarah's, but somehow mine got brushed aside. Mom tried her usual routine, throwing out excuses about being busy or money being tight. Dr. Chun just nodded and said, real calm. That still doesn't explain the pattern. Why was money always tight for Emily's birthday, but somehow never for Sarah's? My mom didn't have an answer. She just sat there, silent. Then, out of nowhere, she turned toward me, tears streaming down her face. Because I'm racist, she said, just like that. I didn't want to admit it, not even to myself, but I treated you differently because you look more black. And that's unforgivable. The whole room went still, like someone had hit a mute button. Dad looked like he'd been sucker punched. Sarah reached over and squeezed my hand tight. I don't know if it's unforgivable, I said after a minute, my voice shaky. But it sure messed me up. Mom nodded through her tears, sobbing quietly. I know, she whispered, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right. If you'll let me, she said. It wasn't some magical fix. There were still plenty of awkward moments, still times they'd slip up and I'd have to call them out. But that confession, that was the first time I actually started to believe they might really be changing. Meanwhile, Sarah's pregnancy kept moving along. Her first ultrasound felt like a huge milestone. We all went, even Jason showed up. Watching that little blob wiggle around on the screen made everything feel a lot more real. Sarah cried almost immediately. Jason looked like he was about to pass out, but he kept holding her hand through the whole thing. My parents just kinda lingered in the corner, unsure what to do, until the tech smiled and asked if they wanted to see their future grandchild. After that, Mom couldn't stop rambling about baby names and cribs and cute outfits. By the time Sarah really started showing, we'd all settled into this new rhythm. It wasn't perfect, not even close, but it was better. My parents were putting in real, consistent effort. And me, well, I was cautiously letting them inch their way back into my life. Sarah, despite the morning sickness and her ankles swelling up like balloons, was absolutely glowing. We still spent every other weekend with Aunt Diane. Those weekends quickly became my favorite thing in the world. It'd just be the three of us, hanging out, watching cheesy movies, laughing about dumb stuff. Aunt Diane never pushed about my parents. She just listened, offered advice when we asked for it, and let us be. One Sunday, we were all lounging on the couch at her place when Sarah suddenly grabbed her belly with wide eyes. My heart just about stopped, until she started laughing. The baby's kicking, she shouted, grinning like crazy. She grabbed my hand and placed it gently on her stomach. I waited, and sure enough, I felt this tiny little thump against my palm. It was honestly the weirdest, coolest thing I'd ever felt in my life. Hey in there, I said to Sarah's belly, grinning like an idiot. I'm your Aunt Emily. Can't wait to meet you, little one. Sarah's smile got so big I thought her face might actually split. I found out yesterday, she said, her voice all soft and excited. It's a girl, a niece. I was gonna have a niece. Something about hearing that just made everything feel even more real. Have you thought about names? Aunt Diane asked, looking just as excited as the rest of us. Sarah nodded shyly. I was thinking, Diane Emily Miller, she said, blushing a little. After my two favorite people. I didn't cry. I swear I didn't. 'Kay. Maybe I cried a little. When we finally told our folks the name we'd picked for the baby, my mom actually pulled me into a hug. And not one of those stiff, polite ones either. It was real, warm, and kind of emotional. She leaned in close and whispered, "She's lucky to have you as her aunt." Time flew after that. Sarah managed to finish her first semester at community college with pretty solid grades, which was impressive considering everything she had going on. Jason landed a part-time job and stashed away every single dime for the baby. My parents even transformed their home office into a nursery. They painted it yellow. Sarah didn't want the usual pink. Aunt Diane went all out and knitted enough baby blankets to last through the apocalypse. I kept my head down and stayed focused on school, pulling straight A's through my senior year. When college acceptance letters started showing up, my parents were actually happy for me. They even threw a little celebration when I got into my top choice school. It was the first real party they'd ever thrown just for me. Felt strange but also kind of amazing. Then came the surprise. Sarah's water broke 2 weeks early, right in the middle of my graduation ceremony. 1 second, I was walking across the stage to grab my diploma, and the next, I saw my dad frantically waving at me from the crowd. We dashed to the hospital, and yeah, I was still in my cap and gown. The labor dragged on for 12 hours. Sarah cycled through crying, screaming, and swearing she'd kill Jason if he ever laid a hand on her again. We rotated shifts, me, our parents, Jason's folks, Aunt Diane. Everyone took turns sitting with her. By the 15th hour, we were all running on fumes. Then all of a sudden, it was go time. The doctor told Sarah to push, and a few minutes later, a tiny little person, wailing her heart out, was placed on Sarah's chest. Diane Emily Miller had arrived. 5 pounds, 6 ounces of pure perfection. She had Sarah's little nose, Jason's jawline, and her skin tone was a soft blend of both of theirs. My parents cried when they held her. Aunt Diane did too. And yeah, I did as well if I'm being honest. That night, after everyone else either went home or grabbed food from the cafeteria, it was just me and Sarah in the hospital room. She was half asleep, and I was holding baby Diane in my arms. "Hey there," I whispered softly to my niece. "You've sure shaken things up, haven't you? Everything's different now." And it really was. Just staring at that tiny little face, it hit me how much had changed in under a year. Sarah and I had gone from just barely surviving under our parents' roof to becoming a real team. Our mom and dad, who once scared and disappointed me, were now people I was starting, cautiously, to believe in. And Aunt Diane? She'd gone from someone we barely saw to one of the most important people in my world. Of course, it wasn't all sunshine and smooth sailing. My parents still slipped up now and then. Weekly family therapy was still a must. Sarah and Jason were still figuring out how to co-parent while juggling high school, and I still had moments where I struggled with forgiveness. But as I looked down at baby Diane, I had this deep-down feeling that somehow we'd make it work. All of us. Together. Like she could read my mind, Diane opened her eyes and locked eyes with me. I swear she smiled. I know the logical side of me says newborns don't actually smile, not on purpose, but in that moment, I felt this overwhelming need to protect her. This little girl would never feel unloved. Never feel like she didn't belong. She was going to grow up wrapped in love from a mom who adored her, grandparents who were trying their best, and an aunt who'd learned the hard way what family really means. "You're gonna be just fine," I whispered to her. "We all are."